All right, divers, gearheads, ocean enthusiasts, today's deep dive. We're going deep, really deep, into something crucial to, well, breathing underwater, regulators. I mean, we all know they're what let us, breathe down there, but what's the science, the magic behind these things?
You hit the nail on the head with crucial. I mean, it was pretty amazing when you think about it. Taking that high pressure air in our tanks and transforming it so we can breathe it comfortably at all those different depths. It's not exactly, a walk in the park, especially with all the pressure changes involved.
And that's what I'm really curious about. Like, we've all felt that pressure in our ears going down, that squeeze. Can't imagine what that does to the air we breathe.
You're right, you really feel it. And for every 33 feet you descend in seawater, that pressure increases by a whole atmosphere. So your regulator's got to be working constantly, adjusting the air pressure it delivers to perfectly match the surrounding water pressure. If it doesn't, well, let's just say you could be in for some serious trouble, from struggling to even inhale at depth to, even worse, lung overexpansion injuries.
Okay, delivering the right pressure. Super critical. Got it. But how does a regulator actually do that? I mean, what's going on in there?
No magic, I promise, just some really clever engineering. Think of it this way. Your scuba tank's like a high voltage power line. You wouldn't plug your TV directly into that, right? That's where those transformers come in, stepping down the voltage to something safe, something usable. That's what a regulator does. It uses two stages to gradually reduce that super high pressure from your tank to something you can breathe comfortably.
All right, I like this. Two stages. Okay, break it down for me.
All right, so you've got the first stage, which is connected right to your tank. When you open that tank valve, whoosh, high pressure air rushes in, and this first stage is built tough to handle that. It then passes that air, which is now at an intermediate pressure, to the second stage. That's the part you put in your mouth to actually breathe from.
So the first stage is like the big, strong guy, and then the second stage, it's more like a precision instrument, fine-tuning everything.
You got it. And that second stage, it takes the already reduced pressure from the first stage, and then it gets even more precise, adjusting it again to perfectly match that ambient pressure of the water around you, nice and balanced. That's what makes sure you get that smooth, natural breath no matter how deep you go.
And that's where the diaphragm comes in, right?
Yeah.
It always seems so simple, but so, so important.
It is. It's like the heart of the second stage. So, picture this. A flexible disc that reacts to any pressure changes. When you inhale, the pressure inside the second stage drops. Right. Well, the diaphragm senses that drop, flexes inward, and boom, it activates a lever that opens the valve, letting more air flow in. And when you exhale, the pressure equalizes. The diaphragm chills out back to its neutral position, valve closes, boom.
Wow, that's wild. It's like this tiny little dance happening with every breath we take underwater, just to keep us alive and breathing. Makes you realize how important each little part is, working together perfectly.
Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly why it's so crucial for divers to really understand these different parts, how they all connect, how it all works together.
Speaking of connecting, how about we get into how the regulator actually connects to the tank itself? You've got hoses, valves, those little O-rings I've heard whispers about. Where do we even start?
Let's start with how the regulator attaches to the tank. You've got two main types of connections, INT, that's international, and DIN, which stands for Deutsche Industry Norm. And trust me on this one, you've got to make sure your regulator and tank valve have matching connections or you're in for a bad time. They're not interchangeable.
Makes sense. Wouldn't want to be stuck on a boat with the wrong connection. And I know those O-rings, they're tiny but mighty, right? All about creating that airtight seal.
Oh, absolutely. Don't let their size fool you. Those O-rings are vital for preventing leaks. If one's damaged or, God forbid, missing, you're talking about potential air pressure loss, which, as we talked about before, can have some pretty serious consequences down there.
It's amazing how these small details, they can make such a huge difference. So we've got the first stage on the tank, second stage, ready for us to breathe.
Hmm.
But there's more to it than just those two parts, right?
Absolutely. There's more. We've got the middle pressure chamber outlets on that first stage. These guys provide connections for other important equipment, like your BCD inflator for buoyancy control, and of course, your octopus.
Ah, the octopus.
Yeah.
That trusty backup air source. I always think of it as like, a spare tire for our underwater adventures.
Yeah,
You hope you never need it, but man, you're grateful to have it when you do.
perfect analogy. And having that dedicated alternate air source, its own separate hose and all, means you've got a reliable backup just in case something happens with your primary regulator.
Definitely add some peace of mind knowing there's a plan B down there. And we can't forget about another crucial part. The pressure gauge tells us how much air we've got left to work with.
Right, that pressure gauge, usually connected right to that high pressure chamber of the first stage. Gives you that constant readout of your remaining air supply, how much time you've got. It's super important to keep a close eye on it throughout your dive. It tells you how long you can stay down there safely and plan your ascent so you don't run out of air at the worst possible moment. Most gauges even have those color-coded sections. Red usually means you're getting into the reserve air zone. It's a good visual reminder to start thinking about heading up before you hit that critical point.
It sounds like knowing your pressure gauge is just as important as knowing how to use your regulator in the first place.
You got it. It's all connected. It's all about diving safely and making sure you're aware of what's going on with your gear.
So we've covered the main players.
Huh.
The first stage, second stage, that octopus, the pressure gauge, all working together to make sure we get that sweet, sweet oxygen down there. But before we go any further, I'm really curious about some of the finer points of all this, like those middle pressure chamber outlets. You mentioned those earlier. What's their deal? Why are they so important?
Great question. Let's imagine you're down there and you need to inflate your BCD for some buoyancy control.
So we were talking about those middle pressure chamber outlets on the first stage, right?
Yeah.
What makes those so important?
Okay, imagine this. You're underwater, right? And you need to add some air to your BCD, get that buoyancy just right. That's where these outlets come in. They take that high pressure from your tank and deliver it at a lower, safer pressure for your BCD, because using that full tank pressure directly could damage it.
Like a pressure regulator specifically for our buoyancy. Smart. And I'm guessing the octopus also connects to one of these outlets.
You got it. The octopus, it's got to provide that steady, breathable air pressure no matter what's going on with the air pressure in your main tank, especially as you use more of your air. So connecting to the middle pressure chamber is key because it bypasses any of those potential pressure fluctuations in the first stage. You're guaranteed a good, reliable air supply just in case.
Okay. Yeah, that's something I hadn't really thought about before, but makes total sense. Those outlets are kind of like the unsung heroes, quietly managing everything, making sure those key pieces of equipment get the right air pressure.
Exactly, like the traffic controllers of your scuba system, keeping everything running smoothly. Now, speaking of keeping things running smoothly, we gotta talk about maintenance.
Yeah, got to keep that gear in tip-top shape.
For sure. And one of the biggest things I hear is divers thinking, oh, I rinsed my regulator with fresh water after the dive, good to go. But it's not quite that simple.
Really? I'll admit, I kind of thought a good rinse was the golden rule. What's wrong with that?
Rinsing, it's great, don't get me wrong. It gets rid of that surface salt water, sure. But think about what happens when salt water dries. You get those salt crystals left behind.
I see where you're going with this. Those tiny crystals can really mess things up inside our regulators.
Exactly. They build up over time, and they can start jamming those delicate moving parts, even damage the O-rings. That's definitely going to affect how well your regulator performs.
So rinsing takes care of the obvious stuff, but it's the hidden stuff that really does the damage long term.
Right. That's why regular servicing by a qualified technician is so important for your regulator.
Like taking your regulator to the doctor for a checkup.
Exactly. They can take the whole thing apart, get into all those nooks and crannies you can't reach, clean everything out, replace any parts that are getting worn out. It's all about making sure it's working perfectly and safely for your next dive.
Preventative care, just like with our own health. And on that note, what about those pre-dive checks we're always told to do? What are we actually looking for when it comes to our regulators?
Love that you asked that. It sounds obvious, I know, but first things first. Make absolutely sure your regulator's actually connected to your tank. You'd be surprised how easy it is to overlook the simplest things.
Especially when you're excited and want to get in the water. Okay, what else should we check?
Those connections are key. First stage is on there, tight to the tank valve, hoses are all in good shape, no cracks, no damage, and your second stage is properly connected.
And what about those all-important O-rings? Any tips for inspecting those little guys?
Give them a good look over. Make sure there are no cuts, no tears, no debris. You want them nice and smooth so they create that perfect seal. It's not a bad idea to have a spare O-ring kit too, just in case.
Sounds like those pre-dive checks are all about being proactive, catching those small things before they become big problems in the water.
You got it. A few minutes of looking things over can make all the difference. It's about being prepared and diving smart.
Exactly. So we've covered the maintenance, the pre-dive checks, all super important stuff. But now I'm curious about some of the things we hear about regulators, the misconceptions. Like, I've heard that breathing really slowly conserves your air underwater. Is that true?
The age-old myth. Look, taking those rapid, shallow breaths, yeah, that's not good. It's inefficient. But holding your breath is just as bad, if not worse, especially while diving.
Really? See, now that goes against everything I was told as a kid trying to stay underwater longer.
Yeah, in the pool, it's fine. But remember, when we're diving, that pressure changes as we go up and down. If you hold your breath while you're ascending, that air trapped in your lungs, it's going to expand because the pressure is decreasing. And that, my friend, is how you can get a lung overexpansion injury. Not good.
Yeah, suddenly holding your breath doesn't sound so smart. So, what is the best way to breathe when you're scuba diving?
Keep it simple. Find that natural, comfortable rhythm. Slow, deep breaths are generally the way to go. But the main thing is to just breathe continuously. Don't hold your breath, and you'll be good.
Breathe easy, don't overthink it. Gotcha. Now, here's another regulator myth I've heard, that the more expensive they are, the better the airflow. What's the deal there?
Another myth. While it's true that sometimes you get what you pay for in terms of quality, how long it lasts, all that, today's regulators are pretty darn well designed.
So even those entry-level regulators, they're going to give you plenty of airflow for recreational diving.
Absolutely. It's more about finding one that fits you well, feels good in your mouth, and suits your particular diving needs.
Makes sense. Just like any piece of gear, it's all about that perfect fit. Now, got to ask you about something that always kind of freaks me out. Free flows. Are they as scary as they sound?
A free flow, basically, it means your regulator's just letting out air nonstop, even when you're not inhaling.
Yeah, that sounds like it could be a pretty big problem, especially if you're deep and suddenly you're losing air like crazy.
It can be startling, I won't lie, but it's not usually a reason to panic. Most of the time, it's a pretty simple thing, like a purge valve that's gotten stuck, or even a tiny piece of debris that's found its way into the second stage.
So what do you do if you get a free flow?
First things first, stay calm. You've got your alternate air source, right?
Of course, that's what the octopus is for.
Exactly. If it's a minor free flow, you can often clear it yourself just by gently purging the second stage or seeing if you can dislodge whatever might be stuck.
And if that doesn't work,
If it's a persistent free flow or you're really not sure what to do, signal your buddy, let him know what's going on, and start a slow, controlled descent. Better to be safe than sorry.
always good advice.
Yeah.
It sounds like knowing what to do and having practice really is key to staying safe down there.
And speaking of practice, are there any specific drills that we can do to get better at those regulator skills, build up that comfort level?
Absolutely. In fact, that's what we'll dive into in our next part.
So we spent a good chunk of time now getting into the nitty-gritty of regulators, how they work, how to take care of them. But now I'm ready to get practical. How does all this knowledge translate into actual skills and safety underwater?
And that's what it all comes down to, right? Being prepared. Because even if your regulator's in perfect shape, knowing what to do when things go sideways, that's crucial.
Absolutely. So let's talk about those must-know safety drills, the stuff every diver should have in their back pocket. What kind of scenarios should we be prepared for down there? Well, one of the most basic but super important skills is knowing how to clear a flooded regulator. It's going to happen to all of us at some point, and it can be a little freaky if you're not ready for it.
Yeah, I can see that. We can talk about it up here, but down there, how do you even know if your regulator's flooded?
Oh, you'll know, trust me. Instead of that nice, smooth flow of air, you might get a mouthful of water. Or the regulator might just go haywire, free-flowing like crazy. Could happen for all sorts of reasons. You accidentally hit the purge button, you take the regulator out of your mouth and water gets in. It happens.
Okay, so we're down there. We realize, uh-oh, flooded regulator. What's the move?
Don't worry, it's actually pretty easy to fix. Two main ways to do it. The purge button method or the exhale method.
I've heard of the purge button one. Remind me how that works again.
Just like it sounds, you hit that purge button on your second stage. That sends a burst of air through the whole thing, pushes out any water that's snuck in there.
Easy peasy. What about the exhale method?
That one's good if you don't want to waste any of that precious air from your tank, or if for some reason that purge button's not playing nice. Basically, you take a deep breath from your tank, put the regulator back in, and exhale, but like you really mean it. The force of that should be enough to push the water out through the exhaust valve.
Like giving your regulator a good cough. So we've got the flooded regulator handled, but what if it's something a bit more serious, like a free flow that just won't quit?
That's when you call on your trusty sidekick, your octopus, that alternate air source we talked about, like
Yeah.
that spare tire, always there when you need it.
Right, right. But how do you actually make that switch smoothly, especially if you're already a little stressed about the free flow?
Practice, practice, practice until it's second nature. So your main regulator is acting up. Rule number 1, don't panic. Take a deep breath from your primary regulator, but while you're doing that, start locating your octopus. It should be easy to find, somewhere near your chest, clipped in.
Breathe, reach, and then.
Got it. Now you've got your octopus. Give it a quick purge just to clear out any water, anything that might be in there, then pop it in your mouth, take a breath, and you're good to go.
Sounds simple enough when you lay it out like that, but what about if it's your buddy who's having the issue? We need to share our air. What's the protocol there?
This is where communication is key. As soon as you see your buddies having a problem, signal to them, let them know you see them, and you're there to help. Then you're going to present your octopus to them, make sure the hose isn't tangled or anything.
They grab it, take a breath, and then what?
Once they're breathing off your octopus, looking good, you want to get to neutral buoyancy together, and then start a slow, controlled ascent. Always better to be safe than sorry.
Wow, it's amazing how these skills, they seem so small when you talk about them,
Mm.
but they can make a world of difference down there, especially in a stressful situation.
Exactly. And the great thing is, you don't need to be in deep water to practice this stuff. You can do a lot of it in a pool, or even just shallow water with a qualified instructor.
Such a good point. It's one thing to know it in your head, but actually practicing in a safe environment, that's what really builds that muscle memory, that confidence. And that's what it's all about, right? So there you have it. We've gone from the inside of a scuba regulator to how to keep it running smoothly, all the way to mastering those essential skills that'll keep you safe on your dives.
It's been quite a deep dive, literally. But hopefully, you've come away with a whole new appreciation for these incredible pieces of equipment that let us explore the underwater world.
I know I have. Remember, knowledge is power, folks, especially when it comes to diving. Until next time, dive safe and keep exploring.